Welcome to Context. I'm Bakhtiar Sonov, and now we focus on the urgent diplomatic efforts to contain a rapidly escalating conflict in the Middle East. Foreign ministers from the United Kingdom, France and Germany, the so-called E3, are meeting their Iranian counterpart in Geneva on Friday. This is the most significant diplomatic engagement between Tehran and the Western governments since Israel launched its surprise offensive against Iran just 1 week ago. The E3, once central to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, now find themselves seeking to defuse a crisis that has seen hundreds injured, widespread destruction in Tel Aviv, and threats of further regional escalation. Iran has made it clear that it will not discuss its nuclear program while under attack, while speculation grows over U.S. military involvement, with Donald Trump reportedly holding back for now on ordering strikes. Russia, meanwhile, has warned the United States against intervening militarily. Joining us to analyze this complex and dangerous situation are two distinguished guests. Imam Marwan Gil, head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Argentina, joining us from Buenos Aires, and Francisco Rocha Gonçalves, political analyst, joining us from Oeiras, Portugal. Welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights on this critical issue.
You're welcome.
Imam Gil, let's start with you. How significant is this E3 initiative in Geneva, given the current military situation between Israel and Iran?
I welcome any step, any initiative which is there to de-escalate the conflict and which is bringing us further away from a war. And I think for me it's very important to highlight here to stop the Israeli government on their decision to launch the war against Iran. It's not for me a geopolitical or ideological question. I think we should, for one instance, take off these glasses where we want to analyze and define everything according to our political alliances in the region or on the world affairs. I think for one instance, we should look at it from a moral, ethical point of view. Because as in any war, the price majority or the major price of the war will be by the blood of innocent lives, blood of civilians. And in this case also, the war weighed with the blood of innocent Israelis, Iranians, and all across the region. And therefore, for me as a Muslim, I oppose categorically any war, any military aggression, because in my case, in our case, Islam literally means peace, and I defend categorically the sanctity of human life. And I think as we talk about this region, it's already suffering from major problems, conflicts, aggressions. It's lacking of the security, harmony. We have since the last 2 years constantly a wound which is not stopping of bleeding. I refer to Gaza. Every day, whilst we are talking, hundreds of people are dying. So that's why I oppose strongly this decision of Israel. Before even closing up the last wound, they're launching another war, and in this sense bringing the whole region to the bridge of a war and a major conflict.
So, Mr. Gonçalves, Iran has categorically refused to discuss its nuclear program while under attack. Does this make the Geneva talks largely symbolic at this point?
Well, good afternoon once again. I'll start by agreeing with my fellow colleague, saying that every initiative is positive for war conflict that's going on. And nevertheless, the issue is both existential to Israel and to Iran, at least to Iran regime. Israel is always, the Israel government is always saying, has been saying for a few years, that it will never allow Iran to have a nuclear bomb. Iran, for Iran to have a nuclear plan is part of the national interest in order to balance the power in the region. So, sincerely, I don't know how any talks can accommodate this kind of position. They're all extreme. So we can have the negotiations, we can have the parts, both parts of the conflict speaking, either directly or with the mediator, but nevertheless, it will be a little bit futile for the time being to have these conversations.
Imam Gil, how do you interpret the religious and ideological dimensions fueling this crisis, especially with the rhetoric from Iran's supreme leader about Israel being punished?
I would like to stress out that we should, on both sides, and I think on all sides, everyone should make the effort to be a peacemaker, and instead of fueling more fire into the conflict, trying to extinguish the fire and control it. Because once this fire gets out of control, it will go beyond the region. And as I said, the region is already lacking of security. Already millions of innocent people have paid the price for something they should not have. They're ordinary people like you and me. They deserve to have a secure life. Their further generations deserve to have the same aspiration, the same hope, the same dreams as you and me. And they shouldn't be punished for the wrong decision of few leaders. So that's why I think it's primary in this sense that all the voices at the round table ponder and give priority to peace over their own agenda or their own interests. And in our case, especially me representing the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, our world caliph, the spiritual His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, he warned us many years ago from a world war and said we are already on the bridge. And it's especially now looking at the images and the situation, it's also reminding me of the words of His Holiness Francis, where he said that we can already see a world war in parts, in small pieces. And many of us might have thought in the past that it's exaggerated. But I think it's just on the edge, and we should, at this moment, calm and take in consideration the future of our lives, but also the future generations.
Francisco, does the division within the EU itself weaken the E3's leverage in these negotiations?
Of course, that the position of the European Union has always been divided, but with the growing of the so-called populist governments within the European Union, this division is much more notable or visible at this time. But the position about Iran is quite honestly almost consensual within the European Union, saying that Israel is doing the dirty work in avoiding that Iran can have a nuclear weapon. Nevertheless, if one thinks about this problem, we can see that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, but Israel does have a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
If Iran has a nuclear weapon, the West is saying that they can use this nuclear weapon. How come we can have the nuclear weapon and they can't? In truth, what's going on is that Israel is avoiding Iran to have a nuclear weapon or a nuclear weapon program in order to avoid the balancing of power within the region with Israel. Because nowadays, the power within the Middle East, between the Middle East powers nowadays, is with Israel because of the technological development of its army, its air force, and the possession of nuclear weapons. Of course, if Iran has a nuclear weapon, we will have another problem with Saudi Arabia and some other countries. But in the moral ground, why some countries can have a nuclear weapon and how come some other countries can have a nuclear weapon? Israel never signed the non-proliferation treaty. Iran signed the non-proliferation treaty. If one thinks that in 2003 or in 2002, we already had this kind of discussion. If we remember that in 2002, Hans Blix, that used to be general manager of the International Atomic Organization, agency,
yes.
I was looking for the right word in English, was saying that Iraq never had nuclear weapons. The United States has said that Iraq was developing nuclear weapons. We had a war back then about this subject. About 25 years later, The same governments are saying that Iran in 2 or 3 weeks can have a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
The general manager, Grossi, is saying that in the best case scenario, Iran could have a nuclear weapon in 3 years.
Uh-huh.
So how come we're having this war right now? How come we're not talking with Iran and negotiating a peace nuclear program for Iran as we were doing some years ago? Because if we did that, we would not avoid the development of this nuclear program, and we will not allow for Israel to have the same kind of leverage that it does right now, possessing its own nuclear weapon when no one else can possess in the region. This is a very complex problem, and it's being analyzed in a tendential manner. Mm-hmm. This is the best I can say about this.
Imam Gil, in your opinion, how do you see the role of religious leaders or communities in trying to lower tensions?
I think our duty should be now to be voices of peace and be peacemakers. And I completely also agree with my colleague where he highlighted that when we speak about peace, we should especially base our voices on principles of universal justice. For me, as a Muslim and member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, that's why very soon after even the war in Gaza, we launched our campaign, the unique global voice of our spiritual caliph, as Voices for Peace, where we demanded the immediate ceasefire and also the level of all the hostages, and obviously the implementation of the international laws, because we consider as Muslims, Islam literally means peace. So I want to clarify, I'm not here to defend the Iranian flag or the Israeli flag or the American or the anti-American flag. Yeah. My flag is the flag of peace, because Islam literally means peace. Our motto as a Muslim community is love for all, hatred for none. We defend universally the dignity of every human life without distinction of the creed, color, or race, because the Holy Quran states that whosoever saves one innocent life is as the reward in the eyes of God is as if we would have saved humanity. And therefore, for me, bombarding a hospital or civilians in Israel is a crime in the same sense as bombarding civilians and hospitals in Tehran or in Gaza. For me, the sanctity of an Israeli life has the same value and the same priority as the life of a Persian or of a Palestinian life. Mm-hmm. And make any distinction. And I think that's the importance. And as my colleague highlighted, sadly, we see a justice and a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to such issues. And I think, and that's why I would urge that by wars, nothing will get better. And whosoever is now supporting the Israeli decision to launch a war and even drag others into a regional war, he should find that at the end, he will also have on his fingers the blood of all those innocent lives. So he should keep this in life before making this decision. Therefore, I think all leaders, academics, political voices, we should de-escalate and save the blood of these innocent lives. And therefore, I think one last point just to highlight, as you also mentioned, my colleague, we look back, by wars, you're not going to resolve the issue. By wars, by bombarding countries, and in countries, you're not going to reform an ideology. The best example is the Taliban in Afghanistan, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Gaddafi in Libya, now even the war against Hamas in Gaza. Instead of eliminating these groups and ideology, you make them even stronger. The best example, 20 years of war in Afghanistan, and Taliban returned stronger as before. Yes. Iraq, a disastrous war, and that's where there was the birthplace of later on of ISIS and the terror organizations. So that's why I urge that we should all make the efforts towards peace and especially in the urgency and the importance of diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Francisco, what does Russia's warning to the United States signal in terms of Moscow's red lines in this conflict?
Most of all, it signals to Iran that they're not alone. If one look at this geostrategical problems. There are four powers in the world that want extreme regime change in the international governance. China, Iran, and North Korea. All of them want to be regional or global powers, and all of them look at the United States as being the power that is avoiding either dominance or their growth. If you look at that, it will be very difficult to accommodate these positions. Iran wants to balance power within the Middle Eastern region. And my colleague was saying that there was a war in Iraq 20 years ago, and we didn't get much with that. I'll say a little bit more. With the war in Iraq, we destroyed the Iraq state, and we managed to have a more divided Iraq and an Iraq more dominated by the Iran government, because it grew the influence of Iran in Iraq. In Iraq, it will be the same if some long war happens in Iran. You know that Iraq has 400,000 square kilometers. Iran has 1,600,000 square kilometers. We all remember how difficult it was after Saddam government fell down to balance and to have some kind of normality in Iraq. We are speaking about a country that is 4 times the size of Iraq. This is how Iran is. And of course, Iran is, it's a border to Russia.
Yes.
With the Caspian Sea. It's a country that has been allied to Russia since Shah's regime fell in 1979.
Imam Gil, what do you... yeah, you may continue.
Let me just finish.
Yeah.
It's an ally of Russia. It's aligned with Russia in what concerns regime change in global governance. So it will be very difficult for Russia to abdicate, to have its allied, to have some kind of a regime change. It will be very difficult for Russia, and so therefore Russia is establishing a red line there.
What are the possible scenarios for the next 72 hours in terms of escalation or de-escalation?
Well, the President Trump has said that it will decide in 2 weeks if the United States will engage or not in direct missions in Iran. We can see with that kind of expression that this will not be a fast war. The news from Israel is saying that Israel is dominating the war. President Trump said the United States dominate the sky, but what is true is that one part is saying that they're dominating the sky, but in fact it needs 2 more weeks to decide if they're going to engage. The other part is having a lot of losses, particularly with their leaders in the army and in the intelligence services, but they're replacing them. And what is true is that the Israel defense system, the Iron Dome, was supposed to be more effective than it is, because there are a lot of casualties in Israel too. In the next few days, I sincerely don't have much expectations about peace for the next few days, because this is an existential war, both for Israel as a country,
yes,
it's what all the countries in Israel has been saying, and to Iran's regime. In fact, if Iran loses this war, or loses clearly this war, the regime will be in stake. This kind of regime cannot afford to lose a war with Israel for this subject. For that reason, I don't have much expectations for the next 72 or 144 hours.
Imam Arangil and Francisco Rocha Gonçalves, we deeply appreciate your time and thoughtful analysis during these incredibly tense and uncertain days. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us here on Context. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for staying with us. We will, of course, continue to monitor developments closely and bring you updates as they unfold. Stay safe and see you next time.